Добрый день, дорогие коллеги.
Dear colleagues, good day. Dear audience, online and offline, I'm happy to welcome you. We are talking about mixed use of houses and territories, mixed use concept. This is the concept which is one of the main for urban building discourse, and that's not done by accident, because mixed use of territories really affects our day-to-day life a lot. If different functions are distributed evenly, I mean shops, jobs, services, the number of time we spend on the way to work, the way we have left for our personal business, how many cars, all of this is affected. And we would like to talk about planning the mixed use of spaces in our modern life, because the type of use of spaces and different models of consumption are changing faster than physical reality and material city space. Today we are going to talk about with Russian international speakers. Today we have among the speakers Piotr Kudraf, partner City Makers, Anna Sokolova, marketing director of Ingrad, and Vladimir Shekin, owner and founder of GC Rodina. Online, we are going to talk to experts from different parts of the world. Lars Krukeber, co-founder of Graph Lab from Berlin. More Architects founder Dan Rogaven, Simon Chur, co-founder and executive director of Lead Aid from Hong Kong, and Koichi Takada, the director of Koichi Takada Architects from Sydney, and David Schwartz, partner and founder of Large Studios from New York. And now I'd like to give the floor to Koichi Takada. Could you please tell us about your projects? You work a lot with mixed-use functions in your projects. What do you think? How have we changed our approach to such spaces after the pandemic? Are there some new trends, or is everything same as it was before?
Thank you for your introduction and for having me. I'm Koichi Takada, founder and principal architect of Sydney-based practice Koichi Takada Architects. I would like to start with this image. Can you guess which city this is? This is a typical view of this particular city before the pandemic. And this is the same city during the pandemic. The city stopped and the pollution disappeared. Today we are discussing mixed use in the context of finding the functional balance of the future. One approach to restoring the balance lies in healing the crisis of our time. I see crisis as an opportunity to create a better world, which I hope to demonstrate through a series of my projects. Before the pandemic, architecture brought people together in one space. Architectural success was often measured by crowds and especially people. ARC is a mixed-use project we designed in Sydney CBD before the pandemic crisis took place. ARC was conceived with people in mind. The mixed-use functions include residential, hotel, office, retail, food and beverage. We designed a laneway to bring people into the heart of the building. By opening up and giving back the public realm, we aim to humanize architecture. But during the pandemic, celebrating the public domain has been challenged because of social distancing. Our cities and public spaces have become empty. So how do we measure the success and the balance of architecture when people disappear from the city? Infinity is another mixed-use project designed before the pandemic and completed during the pandemic. This project was designed for people, but equally with the planet in mind. In response to climate change, Infinity prioritizes sustainability and reduces the building's mechanical reliance. We made a hole in the building. This creates a so-called iceberg effect in a highly urbanized setting in order to reduce the heat island effect in the city. So the pandemic has highlighted limitation in the mixed-use model. Both my project Arc and Infinity suffered during the pandemic because retail went online shopping, food and beverage was takeaway only, offices became empty, and hotels were used for quarantine purpose. However, the residential function survived. So if we are to focus on residential moving forward, what is the new measure of the balance? I believe that post-pandemic, this is a great opportunity to pause and rethink, and not just adapt, but we must shift the paradigm from industrial to natural. This is one of my key responses moving forward. It is to bring nature back into the city. And I would now like to demonstrate this point with two new mixed-use residential projects, one proposed in the city and the other in the countryside. Urban Forest is a mixed-use project located in South Brisbane, aiming to be the greenest building in the world. The project draws inspiration from Australia's Daintree rainforest, one of the oldest rainforests in the world. Urban Forest will be carbon neutral ready and provides generous outdoor space, extra space for home office, mixed use residential amenities, and surrounded by nature in the middle of the city, and even urban farming within the building. As opposed to a past project, Arc and Infinity, which provided hard urban surfaces as an extension of the streets, Urban Forest provides a public park which becomes breathing space within the city. Instead of having rooftop penthouses, we are giving back a two-story rooftop of mixed-use residential amenities dedicated to the health and the wellness of the people. The other project example is located in countryside. Mixed use has always flourished in the urban context. Now we can also decentralize the idea of mixed use away from the city. What we have learned from the pandemic is that we can live and work from anywhere. Thanks to technology, you no longer have to live near the workplace in the city, but you can live and work in the countryside much closer to nature. Our project example is Sunflower House, a single-family carbon-positive dwelling. Carbon positive means house with no bills, going beyond carbon zero. It produces more energy than required, which can be fed back to the grid. we call form follows nature. The inspiration for this design was the sunflower, a fast-growing crop that thrives in the sun. Its Italian name, girasole, meaning turn to the sun. Like the sunflower, the roof rotates to follow the sun and harness its power to store energy. Equally, the floors can rotate, following the sun during winter and turning away from the sun during summer. This way of living and working in the countryside is challenging the traditional idea of mixed use in the city. Measuring the architectural success for the future should equally emphasize how we integrate nature in our daily life. Nature is the key. This last project I'm showing you is a mixed-use project in Shanghai, but without residential. Solar Trees future-proofs the need for mixed use by creating one big flexible space. It is multifunctional architecture designed to adapt and change organically. Solar Trees in Shanghai is powered by the sun and forges a greener future for China. It's fast-tracking China's commitment to be carbon neutral by 2060. Through a nature-inspired approach, this project considers the planet, but also changing function of our spaces, which in turn, we hope to bring people back into our cities. By way of doing this, mixed use becomes much more resilient. I will finish with this last image, something we all have in common. Climate change and the pandemic has changed our world. So must our architecture. Architecture needs to adapt as quickly as nature does. Because architecture can greatly contribute to the making of healthier and sustainable places, our role never seemed so relevant in the context of healing crisis. Thank you.
Количество спасибо большое за такой интересный...
Thank you so much for your brilliant story. Really, that was a very interesting idea that lockdown made us closer to nature. Because I've been in Moscow, many people moved to their countryside houses, and living next to nature, I think, certainly will have an impact on the consumer habits in the real estate market in future. Saying that, I would like to pass the floor to Simon Chua. Mr. Chua, your company, Lead 8, is working in 40 cities of the world with offices in Kuala Lumpur, London, etc. Do you see any regional differences in how you design mixed-use environments? Are there any universal trends or versatile trends, trends which would be typical for all places of the world?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to respond by a brief introduction. Lead 8, we are an international design architecture practice based in Hong Kong, Singapore. We do a lot of mixed-use project, and it so happens that today we will be talking a little bit more about the diversity, resilience, and sustainable aspects of our projects. I think that the pandemic has really caused a big shift in the way we live, work, and play. Certainly a lot of projects that we know before the pandemic, pre-COVID days, what we call it, they will have a very different effect on the projects in the future. I think many of us are seeing a very clear trend of a very big migration, shift in people. I mean, with people moving out of cities, moving into the suburbs, people are more reliant on online meetings with all the lockdowns that's happening around the world. The concept of space, it's very different today, particularly in Hong Kong. Well, Hong Kong is a very crowded city, so it's not as if it's very easy for people to just move out and go somewhere else. But I think certainly with a lot of the higher property costs here in this part of the world, it is not so easy to move away. But we certainly can see a lot of people leaving from the West. If you look at the United States, London, and even Japan, there is a very big shift of people moving out of the city. And I think if we were to compare this with what we're seeing in Asia and Hong Kong, we are also starting to see the shift in also the retail industry. I mean, when people move out of the city, I mean, a lot of the spaces within the town and cities, for example, they will also have to reinvent themselves. I mean, traditionally, if we look at the mixed-use model in the past, it really centers around transport as the main hub for connecting all the different functions from living, leisure, office, F&B. But really moving on to the new mixed-use model, what we have found is certainly in the future, every project needs to be quite self-sustainable, quite self-sufficient. Projects tend to become smaller, but more complete in that way, because when people live in the suburbs or when they move out of town, they need to be still connected. The functionality of the city needs to still be there. So that also brings us to another point, which is the quality of our environments. We are starting to see that a lot of developers today are paying very close attention to the quality of our environment. Landscape, for example, I mean, in Asia and China, particularly on the southern side, where you get a more tropical climate, there is a lot more integration with landscape, with buildings. And we're not only seeing just different uses of buildings putting one on top of the other. We are seeing environments coming together, in a kind of more holistic and in a very green way. I mean, this is an image of a project completed several years ago in a city in China, southern China. You can see the architecture and the entire environment. It works really nicely. Even some of the spaces above ground and below ground, with lots of daylight bringing in into the space, it really defines that. And I mean, moving on today, what we're seeing is this integration of landscape and the green environment. It has become the urban fabric of many new cities we see now, particularly parks, for example. They have become more three-dimensional. Obviously, this image that you see, it's a very large-scale context of how we see greenery playing amongst the CBD. But certainly looking at a smaller scale, what we are finding today is a lot of these mixed-use projects, they have a very sort of close integration with nature. And I think that is something really, really important because, we've heard it before, nature doesn't really need people, but people need nature. So if we look at that and then think of how, what happens to the spaces that are left behind, we have to find a very creative and flexible way how we adapt to this new ecosystem. Again, looking at traditional model, we tend to see, every function is pretty independent from one another. But certainly from this part of the world, from Hong Kong and Asia, if you look at it, a lot of the mixed use today, they not only just combine all the different functionality within the same plot of land, neighborhoods are being changed. I mean, we see a lot of pedestrian streets today. People tend to want to live right in the heart of the neighborhood, where you can just conveniently go downstairs, get a cup of coffee, and you're not too far away from the metro station. But if we look at a bigger model, this project is another project that we're working on in Beijing. You can see that the entire high-speed rail system is integrated as part of the basement infrastructure. And that will certainly play a very big change in our urban environments. We're now seeing mass public transportation at a scale that is kind of really, really huge. That's being integrated within the neighborhood. And not many countries in the world can enable this type of infrastructure. Again, looking at it at a smaller scale in Shanghai, this is a project that we're currently working. What we're seeing is a vertical network of road systems where because the projects are getting bigger these days, we cannot depend on the city for the road network. It will create a lot of pressure. What we need to do is to create our own internal transport network by allowing cars to drive up to level 2, level 3 hotel, level 4 office. So that is really, that you can see the role of the public transport does play a very major part in establishing the new identity of the city. I mean, we are also seeing open plazas, elevated streets. I mean, not just this public realm, but a lot of the hotels, apartments, retail, and entertainment, these components, they tend to be a lot more seamless today with the role of public transport coming in. And obviously, in every city, there's always history and heritage. So to deal with it, we need to also be sensitive with the current use of the building, not just because, pre-COVID and post-COVID, we need to also kind of preserve its memory and the function. So a project in Beijing at the moment, you can see this is a warehouse district that has been regenerated to create, a very vibrant commercial community. And because of the weather, just like Moscow, it gets very cold in the winter. So there is a very big component of the project that is allocated underground, where again, it connects to the metro system. So I'd like to also share, this is coming towards the end of my materials. Recently opened project, you can see that this is the first time we're bringing a botanical park into a building, into a commercial building, and we're also building sports facilities inside a shopping mall. So together with nature and sports, which is also part of wellness, I mean, we see this great sort of integration of environment and mixed use project. And again, finally, when in the course of all this design and construction, we also look at smart materials. There are a lot of very innovative materials on the market today. I mean, I won't go through all of it, but some of it we really like is the concept of a transparent solar skin that can be integrated as part of the curtain wall systems in buildings, where it creates a very innovative way of harnessing energy, and we can reuse them. And even kinetic paving, again, very popular in Hong Kong today. We see this being adopted very commonly across a lot of the projects, and also media scheme, the concept of creating a super transparent media that could be part of the architecture of our facade. This also enables a lot of information that is being able to share. And I think that will certainly transform the way we look at buildings into the future. So, I mean, these are some of the points that we feel it's interesting, and I'm really glad to be able to share that with everyone today. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Саймон.
Thank you so much, Simon. Really, mixed use and offer facilities and buildings, this is a guarantee of self-sufficiency of certain territories where buildings in the cities, and we can make reference to the concept of resilient cities, which says that the city should consist of several self-sufficient components. Once one of the components is excluded, it doesn't ruin the whole city. So our next speaker is Lars Krukeberg. Lars, you're working on setting up mixed-use objects using existing historical buildings and just buildings. What is your take? Can you tell us? How can you fit the old city into the modern life of the city? Old building into the modern city to retain its unique outlook. Over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. A lot has been said already, and I won't repeat it. Think of the pandemic. I don't think that the pandemic changes everything. I don't think that we are at a point of complete revolution. I think climate change does that much more. What the pandemic does is actually it brings the problems we were facing before to the forefront already and brings it to the light. So it's better to deal with them. In a way, we can be thankful. It will not be the last pandemic. It is not the first, but it's opening up perspectives on things, and that helps us architects to put the problems before us. You already seen, I mean, nature and open spaces, public spaces play a major role. And I think there will be much more in the future. Not only that we need parks now, because we have to escape our apartments in lockdown, but also apartments itself. If you have no resilient space within your apartment, it will be hard to define that in the future. You need outside spaces, you need balconies, small things, small breakaway zones, I think are important. But maybe, and I want to show you a project that we've done, just one project, that emphasizes a bit kind of the problem of identity. I think what we as architects face today is if we want to create a resilient city in the future, this will only work if we are able to build constructions that honor the past and take the characteristics, right? And then bring it forward, add something new to create a synthesis, because only places of identity will be able to survive, will be able to be re-allegorized, and hence have a new life. Otherwise, we destroy the gray energy that other people before us had been constructing, and that's just a waste. This is a project in Berlin I want to show you because I think it shows nicely what we try to do there. It's an entire block, so it's in between two different streets, one very busy, one more pedestrian. It is a construction site that started at the fin de siècle, 1903. The first post office in Berlin was created there, and that was the first building. And then House 2 in 1915, when telephone was invented, you had the people that connect people. In 1931, all of a sudden, the car is helping, in the postal services and so forth. So over time, buildings had been accumulated and they all created their own little identity. Now, when we were asked in 18, a bit before, to redevelop it, we tried to look at the buildings and honor their characteristics, honor their own identity. This is the project from the top. I don't know if you see my cursor, but basically this whole environment here in the center is our project. And we added a couple of components. We reused most of the spaces into different things. There's still a post office, but it's much smaller. And we added new functions, especially residential parts. What you see here, what is basically in gray, are old parts. And they tell the story of brick building in Germany from 1901 to 1950s. And we wanted to continue that story, that identity, into a new identity today to create something new that works together nicely. So what is red here is new, and it's mainly residential with retail. The facade to the front, the facade is basically trying to use the brick story that we found in Berlin and push it forward. So you can see a residential building on the top with the windows. These windows basically establish the facade, whereas the brick that you would think is the facade, the brick structure now is actually opening up. It becomes amorphic. It creates an entrance. It basically bends away as a roof structure, but it's still being brick. And is very nicely, because it's a protected environment there, a monument on the right of us, we connect to basically the building left and right. And the boxes establish the facade, they are straight, and the brick can move. It's like a little piece, it's a little element that can move very nicely, and that's what we try to do. A couple of images from this front facade. The entrance, as you can see it. Of course, the computer helps us today to recreate extroverted, dynamic structures that maybe could be done in the Middle Ages where you had a craftsmanship and could pay for it. Today, the computer helps us to reach similar forms. Of course, it's called and branded bricks because this is the main story that we found there. We have retail on the ground floor, and we have the living areas on the top with little terraces, as you can see, only in the roof. Then these boxes bend to the back. And from the inside, you create a new space, kind of an interesting space where we don't tell people how to use them. They create their own rituals. If this is your bedroom or your tea ceremony room or just a hangout, that's up for you to decide. When we go into the courtyard, we change these boxes into outside spaces. As I said, I believe every apartment these days needs an outside space. How you do that in towers is, of course, a little bit more difficult, but there are other ways to do this. Berlin is not necessarily a high city. It's coming a little bit too slowly, I think. But here, this is not high-rise buildings. So you have to create these balconies that create their own personal framework in front of your door. So the boxes changes into outside areas. As you can see, also in the old elements, all roofs are reused if it's residential or other uses. The same elements, the same material, in this case, kind of a champagne-colored metal is used throughout to create one materiality identity. So here we're looking from the side. What we did afterwards, and you can't see it here, this is a roof terrace for everybody. That seems small, but it's actually pretty big. Not only do we have water retention here, so heat islands in the city are getting a little bit more blue. You use the water for gray water area, and you have an outside area for everybody. You have courtyards that now, where you have industrial uses, you have restaurants, meeting spaces, and you have places inside that are completely different. This is kind of a religious building. Before here, there were the telephonists that connected people before World War I. And now it's the Kabbalah Center. It's a center of wisdom for people that believe in the Kabbalah. We have been asked to bring a design that fits this giant space, takes use of it, and reshapes it. We found these frescoes in the ceiling, and of course we preserved it and still installed a DNA of architecture that's quite different than the use or even the aesthetic that had been there before. Now we're coming to the back. You see the car was invented, so architecture was bent. Architecture had radii, so you could drive around it. And basically that we translated into this facade. This is a residential building. You see on the floor the old portier. This is a coffee house now. We had to restore it, so the building is built on top of it. And now we have this undulated, beautiful facade that looks towards the south, where everybody has this balcony, a little outside space there as well. This is the same thing from the back. We kind of respond to this rounded architecture that we found. And this is a little movie in the end that I want to play to you that gives you, I hope it's running smoothly. I'm not so sure if it actually does. Gives you a good impression for that. If you can still hear me, I think, as I said before, nature is easy to be claimed, but what is nature today? We believe nature in the truest sense, maybe of philosophers 300 years ago, doesn't exist anymore. We live in the Anthropocene, meaning humankind, mankind has changed nature into mankind nature. So if we talk about what is nature outside, is already transformed into being completely controlled and transformed by the human hand. And that doesn't have to be a problem. I think we have to look into what we can bring back in the cities. And I agree with the two gentlemen that spoke before me. If you bring in green in the city, it will help. But it's not, I wouldn't call it nature. But this is just, how you label things in the end. The main thing, I think, is identity. For us architects, if you want to reuse things, as we've done in this project, there has to be a strength in architecture. And if we don't resolve to bring the strength and build it forward, I think our buildings will not last, meaning there won't be a heritage to use for the people that come behind us. So the resilience of our cities has a lot to do with identity that we create today. So the things can't just look the same everywhere. We have to find the genius loci, work with it, and bring it forward. And there is the resilience of the future. And that is it. Thank you so much.
Lars, спасибо большое.
Thank you so much, Lars, for the presentation of such a nice project. And really, it can give us a lot of thoughts for designing the future. And now I'd like to invite our next speaker, Dan Rogeven. Mixed-use concept in general implies mixing of different users, businesses on one territory within one facility, but usually the same facility would be designed by one architect. In your projects, you are collaborating with the existing users of the territories or the facilities. Does it have any say on your spatial solutions?
And very glad to share some ideas and thoughts with you. I want to talk a little bit about mixed use and how we can learn from actually Mr. Sun. We are an architecture and design firm based in Shanghai and Amsterdam, doing not only research but also design. So we combine urban research and urban planning. And actually what we try to do is learn from our research and implement that into our designs. We set up our office in 2012 in Shanghai, and only 3 years ago set up a second firm here in Amsterdam. And it all started with this book, How the City Moved to Mr. Sun, a research into cities in central and western China. And I just want to share a little bit of the results of that research. So what we saw in visiting cities all over China, we realized that the method of planning was very much top-down, large-scale, monofunctional actually in the cities throughout China. But we also found an alternative, and this alternative was the so-called urban village, a very much bottom-up initiative by farmers who basically saw their environment urbanizing around them and started to build up small settlements, small-scale settlements. And the sort of structure and system behind that urban village is that it's a mixed-use environment which combines working and living, which is very walkable, so you don't need a car to get around. It's a fine-grained urban fabric creating diverse living environments, and it's very much market-driven because it's and therefore bottom-up created, high density and allowing for affordable housing as well. And in one of these urban villages, we met this guy, Mr. Sun. And he is a farmer who basically created his own house, a commercial plinth, an internet bar, a private apartment on top of that, affordable housing, and then urban farming at the rooftop. And that was very much our inspiration for our first building in China, a mixed-use building in the city of Jiaxing, close to Shanghai, where actually the idea of the village was at the centerpiece of our proposal, a combination of 8 buildings that combined hotel, short-stay apartments, sports facilities, offices, restaurants, and art gallery. Small blocks in high density, combining with public space at the very heart of it, and combining all these functions into one settlement, if you will. Where the public space is really at the center of the development. And you see that we densified not only through putting different volumes with different functions, but also by stacking. So creating F&B and with a hotel on top, bridges connecting these different buildings, small scale, so there's enough shade. We have an active landscaping and stairs that act as an outdoor theater, and so forth and so forth. So really trying to learn from what we saw in the urban village of Mr. Sun into this project. And one critical thing is that we also introduced culture as a connector. So there's a modern art gallery that is actually, as you can see here in the section, running from the basement to the 3rd floor, almost as a kind of mini Guggenheim, connecting all these floors, but also not only connecting spaces, but also connecting people. So the gallery here, the Modern Art Gallery, is really a place for young kids to be educated about contemporary art, which is quite fantastic, actually. Now, these same principles we now also try to introduce in our projects in the Netherlands. For example, in this urban planning project for the city of Amsterdam. So we were asked by the city government to make a proposal for this waterfront transformation at the heart of the city, actually. That is, of course, traditionally an area where there's a strong division between work and live, and also two very different skills. The work skill is industrial, large scale, and the live skill is very small and intricate. But these are two worlds that are very much divided. And we started looking at this humongous site actually, and decided to divide it in smaller villages, smaller entities connected by one big public waterfront. So this idea of different villages with different urban identities and urban fabrics that are connected by one cultural zone, a public space at the waterfront that has a couple of cultural facilities at its waterfront, but also trying to combine work and live in this area. What happens very often now in cities across the globe is that we are transforming places of work into places for residents, which is a good thing in the end. But we have to make sure that we also keep, let's say, workplaces in the city. And that's not only, let's say, office work, but also practical workplaces, places for creativity. And one of the things we found is that by using this industrial scale, that is already in the DNA of this area, right? These former factories and workshops and so forth. By using those in your urban plan, you can that also allows for creative spaces, for art spaces, but also for restaurants and so forth. So a higher base of these kind of buildings allows for that. And we're very happy that our urban plan is now being translated into the planning policy of the city for the future plans of Amsterdam 2050. The third thing I want to share with you is our project Zoho in Rotterdam that we worked on together with Eco Urban Design and a series of architecture firms, a winning proposal for an inner city transformation, urban transformation of a former industrial area into a residential area. And of course, you can see in this picture from the 50s, you see that people are combining work and live already in this environment. And that was also our commission. So the concept of this proposal tries to combine work and live in 3 layers, and they call sort of layered landscape, if you will, combining lab, land, and city. An industrial layer that has a bigger size and bigger scale, so it allows for usage in terms of bars, restaurants, but also workshops, creative spaces, and so forth. And on top of that, we create a park kind of layer, which is also water resilient. And on top of that, we create a residential zone. We're now working on one of these city blocks where we're actually creating huge diversity in housing typologies, careful detailing, but also green roofs, so that this land layer is really coming into life and nature is really close by. So, finally, one last thought about a project we're currently working on in Rotterdam, which is called The School. A couple of years ago, there was a very inspiring speech by the mayor of Rotterdam here, who said, well, I'm fine with densifying my city, but please let's make sure we also have public space at the base of our buildings. For example, schools. So build schools in residential towers. Very strong statement, a very clear statement also, and very inspiring. And then we got a commission to work on this former school building in the center of Rotterdam and transform it into a residential neighborhood. And then we said, well, this is an opportunity too good to be true, so let's make sure that we keep that school there. And on top of that, we place a high-rise with residential. So we create 100 apartments and a primary school, combining learning and living. So it's not just about keeping mixed use, it's not just about combining work and live, but also learn and live. Because by densifying our cities, we also want to keep families in our towns, and families have kids, obviously, and these kids need to go to school. So we need to create a place where we can learn and live together, where education can become the connector of cities, a vibrant base of a residential tower, a place where kids can keep on learning, so in kindergarten, but in primary school, but also in apprenticeships, in companies. So the school really becomes a machine for emancipation and for connection in the city. So back to Mr. Sun. What can we learn from this former farmer that is now an urban resident? I think it's 4 things. It's about fragmentation, so breaking up the scale of larger blocks in smaller volumes. It's about creating fine-grained urban networks. Fine urban grain also creates diversity in your city. It's about this industrial scale at the base, so be inspired by the former factory scale and to create that as a base floor in your program that allows for a mixed use program. And finally, the cultural connector, so to create connections through cultural and public programs. And I think that in the end, mixed-use environments create cities that are more lively, diverse, and sustainable and resilient over time. Thank you so much.
Спасибо большое за такой человеческий.
Thank you very much for this very human talk about architecture. We plan cities for people, for humans, and humans can tell us a lot about improving spaces. And now I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker. That's Peter Kudraf. He will have some short introduction by him. We are developing the so-called gray zones in Moscow, and such territories, they change their face. We could have some functional balance using the city standards, but now that's much more difficult to do because Moscow has new goals. Thank you. You're absolutely right. We are urbanists, and our goal is to prove that we have not only housing in the city, there are lots of other functions, and all of them are important. So now we have too much potato in this Russian salad. We could add some peas, some ham, some mayo. It's eatable right now, but it's not so delicious while we have too much potato. And when we work with mixed-use spaces, we move in between 3 points: housing, work environments, and there is some so-called third place. And it's the most difficult task is to define what's this third place. What is it supposed to be? Sport, culture, public spaces, community. Without these functions, housing is not gonna meet its goal, and we constantly move between these 3 points in the triangle. I'll mention 3 projects. 2 of them are finalized. We just continue supporting them, and one of the projects is in the active stage. First of them, it's located in the middle, in this middle zone, gray zone. It's a project for Glavstroy, a very interesting space, Vinogradskaya Highway, where this highway meets the third transport road. There used to be a factory located before. On this diagram, I show that the gray zone, there are no good housing buildings, and there are no jobs. There are no working spaces for qualified workers. There are some empty factories with category C office premises. So we wanted to create some new environment there. We spoke with the customer a lot, engaged different experts in this program. But we managed to achieve a very good balance. Now we have 180,000 square meters of housing and also significant amount of office buildings. But the problem is that around there, in 10 minutes walking distance, there is nothing useful, no functions. And we had to reinvent a city in the city, building city functions from scratch. It's like the mini village inside one block. This space is divided by a very big highway. That's why we had to do something to integrate housing with offices. And at the same time, we had to do something for the level 0 space with public spaces and very active first floors having different functions. That's what we've done. This is the project that won the competition. It's a very interesting architectural bureau from New York, Brooklyn, Aaron Chan and his ODA bureau. And you see here the housing part, this green part, apartments and a hotel that's blue section and offices. But we wanted to create one circle. We wanted to combine different areas here, and we wanted this to be one living organism which has complementary functions, offices together with housing premises. And now it's a very interesting idea with good public spaces.
Значит, вот это, собственно говоря, офисная часть.
These are offices. It also has very interesting central plaza with lots of retail opportunities. This is view on the offices and a great art center around the plaza. And it has different options, educational function, entertainment and sport functions. And it's actually very beautiful square, which will be the landmark in this part of Moscow. Next project, Pangea, for MKAL Real Estate, together with Mr. Mirakilan and his agency, architectural agency. There are 4 different spaces. All of them are located in this middle gray zone of Moscow. We wanted to have a unified idea. It should be the supercontinent, so they should be all interconnected by one idea somehow. So there used to be Semashko factories there. They were producing pharma products. And we continued this idea.
Все, что касается well-being в самом широком понимании.
And this project has well-being functions. Well-being for body, for health, and for brain. All of them are also complementary. In the future, people will be moving between these objects, getting lots of services related to well-being, and every region will service a residential district around. So inside, we do not have any housing, and I think that's good and correct idea. This is the project at Sergei Radonежko Street. It's been built already. It's managed by a very strong team, which was responsible for Flacon Center earlier. And the third project, which is in an active stage now, we've been developing it for 1.5 years. ZIL South. That's the master plan, which we have for this district, implemented by KCIP Bureau on the basis of our ideas, our inventions. And here we have 100 hectares of residential premises. We wanted to invent something interesting for first floors while the houses were already there. I think there will be new type of lifestyles after all these projects are implemented. And now I'd like to give the floor to Anna Sokolova. We don't need to change the space if we want to change the function, because we use lots of digital technologies. Could you tell us about the practice of developing projects? How do you use digital services, and what are the benefits? Good day. My name is Sokolova Anna. I'm the marketing developer of Ingrad developer company. For 17 years, I've been working in real estate. We analyze market, we develop concepts for housing complexes, and I can see that in the last years we've changed the concepts of complexes. Quality is better, functions are undergoing evolution and technical functions are changing. Right now, we have the period of uninterrupted technical revolution. We see new technologies which change our life, and they affect all aspects of our life, and of course they change the housing complexes. Several years ago, for implementing multifunctional housing complexes, we needed, as a developer, lots of space. We really needed lots of area for placing all the functions there. This is an example, one of our projects, a multifunctional complex at Simonovskaya embankment. That's 70 hectares, really big zone. Here we will have 2 housing complexes, 240,000 square meters of housing, more than 3,000 flats. And it's not going to be just the residential function. There will be the modern torpedo stadium built and health care center, fitness center with a swimming pool, shops, restaurants, community centers, co-workings. Really very big infrastructure. This complex is being built right now. The concept was developed in 2017-2018. I think that when we have new technologies, lots of functions in the project could be implemented without lots of physical space. Now we have digitalization era and mobile services are developing. We can improve functionality. We can add new functions to our complexes without providing some physical space for these functions. There could be optimization of these functions.
Одно из таких направлений развития жилых комплексов — это переход от.
We see the shift from scattered objects to the situation when we have all the functions and objects within one house. And digital services are becoming more and more popular, and this would change the concept of multifunctional complexes when we have to optimize space and at the same time we can create diversity of functions. Really great diversity is now possible, and you tenants will be able to use more functions than before. Another good trend. We see the combination of different facilities in one digital environment. Technical area is getting more complex. We have new opportunities for exploitation, for maintenance. It's possible to get additional income because we can add additional services and functions which were not possible before, especially when the space was limited. This is one of the good visible trends that we notice. So it's not only the change due to the pandemic times, but also digitalization. It's one of the phenomenon that drives a change. Thank you very much, Anna. Interesting idea about the fact that digital products can transform functionality of physical buildings. Maybe this is the road that we should go down to. That's what we can do with existing districts, residential districts. Maybe this is something that's going to change the face of our cities. And now I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker. That's Vladimir Shekin. Vladimir, You work for Rotterdam group of companies, and I know that you have one extremely unusual type of complexes. It has housing and some other functions. Please tell us about this idea. That's true. Historically, we were working with this format, and this format is actually already 10 years old, and it's possible for us to use a unique recipe. Yeah, like Peter said, in our recipes, some ingredients are overused, and we managed to observe the balance, and our recipe is perfect. I absolutely agree with Anna. We live in unique times. Anna and me, we represent developers, entrepreneurs, and of course, we constantly face transformations, changes, and they are not linked to increased expectations of people. They have new requirements to comfort, but there are also external factors such as pandemic, and mixed use can be an answer to this question, can help us to solve some of the issues. But we always should remember, yesterday there was an inspiring speech by Sergei Sobyanin. I think it was amazing during the panel discussion. And
he said that we have to actually develop the cities for people and with the people. We have to follow this rule. And this is back to the question how we came up with that format, through the prism of human-centric approach. Such cities in Moscow, really, that's quite challenging, because when you are developing the city for 12 million people, you have to develop 125 different districts. And this development has to be comprehensive and balanced. Balanced means mixed use and self-sufficient districts. And 15 minutes city, it means that everything should be walking distance to a comfortable and convenient environment. But how do you reach that? Again, yesterday, back to the plenary session, I can tell you that I liked very much this slide, which was shown by Mayor Sobyanin. This is the formula of success, which helps us to develop the cities. This is when you are creating the environment which attracts people, and these people would invest their soul, the investments into the city, and thus creating jobs which would attract more people. It turned out that this formula of success is laid into the foundation of our life clusters approach. We are different from other developers. We are not proceeding from the classical restrictions or limitations. We are not proceeding from the current situation, but we proceed from understanding what people would be interested in doing on that territory, what activity they would be interested in doing, what professions they would like to choose. After that, we ask a question. What will help them to implement or realize themselves, and after that we design a safe and comfortable environment, which is much spoken about. So the difference between our approach and other approaches, but the live housing cluster, this is an example of a mixed use in development. The high-tech jobs, which due to the position of our clusters would be created, they allow people to implement themselves in future. And due to the infrastructure, actually they can somehow achieve a lot of results and victories in education, culture, and so the housing environment is part and parcel of that. Let me draw a specific example of what we're doing. The very first example, this is the very downtown of New Moscow, center of New Moscow. When comprehensively developing the new territory we are doing, the very first in Russia district of Russian design. 1/3 of that, this is about infrastructure. We bet on design as the profession of the future. And in terms of mixed use, we have 9 hectares of a park and a very long boulevard in which you can walk along, enjoying everything. Unique aesthetic characteristics, etc. So there is a river embankment, but apart from that, we also set up an Academy of Fashion which belongs to Yudoshkin, and a center of Ms. Giner, aerials, mixed fights club, etc., etc. You may have a look at how it looks like. In a year's time, we're going to commission that facility. That's the refurbishment which we offer. And this is our master plan. Another project, Ivanovo city. Ivanovo, at the time, was the 3rd industrial capital. Then it was the capital of brides, meaning that there were a lot of women working at the textile industry. And the textile production was phased out back in 2018. You have to do something about that industrial zone. But in essence, we are restoring, reviving the business center. We are restarting that, relaunching that, and instead of Ivanovo manufacturers or textile plants and factories, we are going to build something new. That would be a technical park, industrial park, and also an international students' campus would be set up following the instruction of President Putin. And you see what requirements we set for that project. These are the preliminary solutions which we will certainly follow. And of my presentation, I'd like to echo what I said from the very outset. Every hour activity actually has to be aimed at one thing, has to be human-centric, has to be aimed at developing the people, helping them to realize themselves. In our projects, we present for the fact that our new generation has to be healthy, has to be developed and well-educated. So this is the key factor behind the success. Thank you so much, Vladimir. Actually, there are lots of speakers in that session, and there is no time for a Q&A, but I'd like to thank everyone for your diverse ideas, various ideas related to mixed use. And I hope that it will be developed in many Russian cities, including Moscow, and that the economy would only help to boost that. Not only the special solutions are to be brought about, but actually it has to be very resilient and long-term. Thank you so much, and see you again.